Afternoon, everyone. So Pat warned me that the clock is just going to start. There's not going to be any warning. There's not going to be any, all of a sudden the timer's going to be going and you just should, that's it. That's your time. And sure, it's actually happening. This is great. Hey, everybody. Thanks for coming out. I'm Jamie. I talked earlier. This was intended to be Operation Administration Management using Teams Admin Center. So the first thing is I'll ask for a little bit of your grace. I was putting together this deck, and there's something when you've done a few of these, you can kind of get a little bit of the rhythm of all right, I'm going to tell you what's in the box. We're going to talk about what's in the box, and we're going to bring everyone up to speed on what's in the box, and we're going to show you maybe some new stuff that recently got put in there, and that's kind of cool. And then we're going to talk about what maybe have one slide about suggesting some things we're going to do in the future. And I just needed to invert that completely, because one of the big reasons I'm out here is that I really want to know what's on your mind when it comes to the what I used to call the IT pro experience, but it is also needs to be appropriate for folks that aren't IT pros, right? Folks that need to be able to manage, administer, and operate their team's deployment and their tenancy, and they don't have a giant history with telephony, and they haven't been doing video conferencing for the last decade, and they're just kind of wrapping their heads around this stuff, and it's hard, it's weird, it's complicated, and we need to lower the barrier to entry dramatically. And at the same time, we have to have incredibly sophisticated and powerful tools for giant customers that are doing a ton of great work. And so I was kind of suffering with this and going I just can't do a normal thing. So with your grace and your patience, I'm going to do a slightly different thing. I'm going to invert the kind of topics a little bit, and we're, level set us on some stuff, but we're really going to talk about what my team's building. And that's weird because I've never really had maybe the authority, I guess, to just to come out here and say yeah, in the next year, I'm going to make sure we get this stuff done. And if you have thoughts about that, then now's the time. You can tell me now, tell me a little bit later, deliver drinks tomorrow, whatever. No one said okay, Jamie, now you got this title and you're all good. You can go and do this. So it's a little bit of a surprise when I realized that was a thing. Oh, nice. I know what that is now. And so with that, if this is terrible, then you should let the conference organizers know that. It's really important. If this is not the kind of thing that you want to be a part of, if you don't want to see this kind of content in the future, you can tell them that. You can tell me that, and it will change, and it will get better, and it will constantly improve. We will Kaizen this thing, right? When I used to do conferences, the evaluations were just so important. And I really, really hope that everyone takes an opportunity, give the feedback, both about this session, the other session you're going to, the show as a whole. It's super, super critical. So we're going to talk just a little bit about Teams Admin Center and a little bit about some of the stuff that's happened recently, just so that way everyone's kind of on the same page. Again, I'm not going to try to talk a lot about that. And then we're just going to talk about what's happening. Because I'd love to come back to what used to be the ivory tower and is now my tiny closet in my guest room and have a little bit more confidence of hey, we're on the right track, but we've got to make some pivots here. Or, no, you know what? Actually, this isn't the right scope. We've got to think a little bit more audaciously or a little bit more dramatically about what some of our work is about. And so I'm hoping that this is a way to generate some of that conversation. And hopefully, if it happens here, I think I have a thing that's padded that I can throw at people and not hurt them, which is awesome. And then you can talk into it. Pat, is that generally the way it goes? Okay, Pat's nodding, so that's good. Or again, it could be a little bit later on today, or it could be over beverages, or it could be tomorrow. But Teams Admin Center is intended to be the place where folks can do all of the things they need to do with respect to Teams to make sure that it's operating well. We look to have it be both powerful and really usable. Again, not just for IT pros. We think a lot about IT pros, and goodness, the name of our org internally is IT pro, but know that that me and my colleagues, like we're intentionally trying to think more broadly about this and be thoughtful about that design, not just for powerful experiences for giant businesses, but hey, if smaller organizations, mom and pop shops, they also should have the right to be able to do all the great things with Teams that are exposed through Teams Admin Center. Another journey, that's a reciprocal capability between the websites and the APIs. What does that mean? As an IT pro, as an administrator of Teams, you should have the freedom to say, I have a task to do. I think that this task is best served in PowerShell, and I'm going to go and do that. And for some of you, maybe when you have a hammer, everything looks like a nail. Pat Richards. And so PowerShell is going to be your thing, and that's great. But you could also be thinking, hey, you know what? This is a simple onesie-twosie thing. No big deal. I don't need to script it up. I can hit the website really quick. Some folks, they should feel like they can do all the things in Teams Admin Center. And today we don't have that. We don't have that reciprocal capability. We need to build out a bunch of experiences, shockingly enough, both in PowerShell and in Teams Admin Center, to be able to have that reciprocity. But no, that's a goal. No, that's something that we are absolutely looking to prosecute. The customizable piece, that's really for the integrators in the room, for the folks that work with lots of different customers. You may find that your customer's experience with Teams Admin Center looks a lot different than yours, because you may be in a demo tenant, you may be in TAP, you may be seeing with a fully licensed configuration. Your customer may be seeing a partially licensed configuration. Stuff will look different, and that's intentional. We don't put things in front of customers that they don't have rights to, for example. And so any element within the Admin Center we can show or hide, and we do that frequently. Licensing, what region you're in, if you're in a mainline Office 365 deployment versus for federal government type deployments and so forth. So there's a lot of reasons that could look different. Just be aware of that. We want to be responsive. We want to make sure that regardless of what type of device you're using, Teams Admin Center works well. We really suffer over perf and data, and so we try to instrument it really well. And there's just a ton of different languages that are supported. If you do happen to speak a language other than English, I'd love it if you could use Teams Admin Center in there, because I guarantee you will find a goofy translation thing. And I've had folks from Germany, for example, come back and go like, actually that word, that's the wrong word. That's totally out of context, and that's weird. And it's kind of odd. And it makes sense, right? A lot of times our translators, they may not have the context for what it is. They may just be seeing the string in kind of atomically, right? And so love to be able to get that feedback. This is maybe my nod to making this a little bit of a 300 level session. There are a lot of systems that operate behind the scenes with Teams. And essentially, all of these systems kind of manage unique pieces of the experience. And Teams Admin Center goes and touches them all. So essentially, think of us as like this, I like to say, very thin patina across an incredibly deep set of infra. The first two, Azure Active Directory and Graph, those are obviously used broadly at Microsoft, right? And so for Graph, you can do all sorts of different things. Primarily in Teams Admin Center, we're using those for operations that deal with teams and channels and membership and that type of thing. Azure Active Directory obviously is our primary user directory. Also, for doing operations with groups, we're hitting AAD. Everything else, right? All the stuff below that is all specific to Teams, right? These are not shared infra that the rest of the company is kind of playing on. This is primarily for Teams. And again, I think this is more for the practitioners. So that way you can kind of see of like how different transactions will hit different backend systems and where things can go sideways. Anytime you're dealing with a policy, you're using ACMS. Anytime you're dealing with like a set of configuration, if I'm configuring a session border controller, or I'm configuring a set of translation rules, all of those are still stored out of ACMS. But if I'm dealing with like the actual phone number itself as an object, as a thing that I've got to go and manipulate, or I've got to release or acquire more of, or all of that is telephone number management, what we call TNM. And so TNM like actually doesn't even really know much about what a tenant is. TNM just kind of deals with the atomic unit of a phone number and how that phone number needs to be managed. Similarly, when it deals with locations, you have a location information service and a network configuration service that deal with things like the emergency address records in location information service, or all the records for configuring your network for dynamic emergency calling in NCS. But when I take all of those things and I have an assignment action that goes and happens onto a user, and you have both the phone number and the location information, that's handled by a service called BVD right now, the Business Voice Directory. And then there's another one for voice apps and a whole nother set of work that specifically deals with the objects that the voice apps rest on top of, called resource accounts. And then again for device management, and again for reporting and analytics. So if you actually looked at like all the different endpoints and APIs and stuff that Teams Admin Center is hitting, it is incredibly broad, because we're touching all these different pieces of the product. We're touching all these different areas. And so one of the things you may notice is that if something's going sideways in one part of the product, it's probably pretty obvious of like what area you may have an issue with. So that can help you with debugging, or that can help you if you need to open up stuff with support. So some stuff that we've done recently. Operator Connect is a new feature that's come out recently that allows folks to be able to have essentially like a direct routing type of configuration, but one that's managed through an operator partner. And then that operator partner's phone numbers actually show up within your phone number management facility. It's a little more streamlined to be able to manage. So we have all of those operations kind of set up to be able to nail up the connection with your operator partner, manage where you're getting phone numbers from, that sort of thing. That also bled into enhancements in search. We'll look at those in a second. A bunch around porting. God, for a long time, we were like really having a tough time with porting, where most port requests would immediately go over to the service desk. The service desk had a really bad queue. Now we've really tightened up the connectivity between the service desk and Teams Admin Center. They're getting the same information. They're literally working off of the same page of records. It's a big step forward for that. We've seen that queue times drop, and a lot more of our ports we're looking to have them be automated end to end, so humans not going to have to touch and mess with it. We completely blew up the left nav and confused everybody, which was fun. But it's a lot more rational now, and it's making a little bit more sense. So I'm glad that we took our medicine on that. Bunch of new stuff on voice applications, being able to see how network locations and network elements show up in emergency locations. So there's just been a bunch of good work there. I'm going to now like really confuse PowerPoint. I'm going to switch over to Teams Admin Center. So this is our thing. This is Teams Admin Center. This is just a very simple demo tenant that I set up for my team that I'm in now. So there's a handful of us in here. It's not all the same kind of sophistication for a 10,000 seat org. It's pretty straightforward. So one of the things that we did was we completely redid this left nav. So instead of having an org-wide settings for things that like dealt with the configuration all across the tenant, now we've affinitized them within each area. So if I'm like looking for, hey, how does Teams operate within the tenancy, that goes into Teams settings. If I think about how do I want to have my upgrades or my updates to the client operate, those are also kind of buried within the Teams subnav there. Nothing's been lost, only stuff has been moved around. And then voice ends up, because So we have a lot of capabilities for voice within the product. Voice ends up getting its own kind of whole section. And then we broke it down into stuff dealing with phone numbers at the top. So whether or not you're acquiring them from Microsoft, whether you're using an operator to be able to do that connection, or you're using direct routing, all that's centralized up there. 6 different policies right now, and you'll hear about another 3 or 4 that are coming down the line as part of our work. Dial plans, funny enough, they're a policy. We just don't call it a dial plan policy because legacy, I don't know, that's kind of weird. We just haven't done that. But it's confusing for folks. Dial plans are a policy and you assign them to users. And then down the bottom, auto attendance, call queues, holiday resource accounts, all the areas around the voice application space. And so for Operator Connect, I don't have any operators configured here, but you can see we have like even logos and all this kind of fancy here. This is like the closest that we've come to actual marketing within the admin center, I think, at this point, which is pretty exciting. But if I wanted to, I could do a search and just maybe say, let me just show all of the operators that are dealing with Canada, for example. And so here are the operators, actually Canada and Chile. Here are all the operators that deal with some from Canada and Chile. And then I can look at their different offers. I could go and I can click through them, and I can then have them be configured within my tenant to where they can provide phone numbers directly into my tenant experience. And so then for that, when we look at the phone numbers page, we had to do some work to be able to make sure that that's enumerated in the right way. So I could see like, oh, I've got some phone numbers from Microsoft, or I have some phone numbers from another carrier. Did a bunch of work on just the raw acquisition of the product. And of course, now that I'm on hotel Wi-Fi, it's going to do its thing to like really make sure that I have lots and lots of words between each click. So if I'm looking for, let's do again some phone numbers in Canada. And so for those phone numbers in Canada, maybe I'm looking for user numbers. And here, here I've got all the different Operator Connect partners listed here. But the one that I have available is actually the Microsoft one. And then I can go and I can actually do either acquisition by my location, which we've always had, or acquisition by area code. Actually, this is a really popular feature. Has anyone done this? Yeah. Like now we're finding a good like quarter of our phone number requests that come up with phone numbers that actually get assigned are coming from the search by area code versus search by location. So you feel really good about having that facility now brought into the product. So anyway, quick tour of some of the stuff that we've done recently. So that's right. We're going to spend the rest of the time. This is what we're working on now. This is all non-controversial. This is all stuff that is actually in the pipeline that I've got some kind of views of that we get to talk about. And then after that, we're going to talk about the stuff that's a little bit more out there and a little bit more nebulous, and we can have a little bit of fun. So all of these I have kind of specific talking points on, except for assignment of direct routing numbers to users. Let me just apologize. This has been something that I've literally had work items for several quarters. We were right there, ready to have all of direct routing go to production. And the last piece was phone number assignment. I'm like, all right, no big deal. This is a commandlet. This is easy. Where's the API for the commandlet? Bunch of weird non-answers. Okay. All right, well, that's fine. Maybe it'll take a little bit of time next quarter. What's going on here? We need to redo everything. So there's literally a bunch of surgery that's happened in the back end to make sure that assignment of direct routing works as intended. Yeah, Operator Connect needed to jump the queue a little bit because of the announcement and the release and all those things. But this is happening. I promise you, this is happening. I already have the UX done. I literally just need to wire it up. I'm waiting for the service and it'll happen. But anyway, that will be done. The other stuff, fun to talk about. This is known as SEFA for all the terribly old telephony nerds out there. Secondary extension feature activation means I, as a admin, have the ability to go and set Bob's or Sue's telephony configuration. We've had this for delegation and for group call pickup for a while. And this is, funny enough, one of the very few things that you can do on Teams Admin Center that you cannot today with PowerShell. We don't have an interface to be able to manage that capability. In PowerShell, it's only in Teams Admin Center. What we're doing is we're expanding that now to include also simul ring and forwarding, which seems obvious, but it's taken us a long time to get there. So essentially, you'll imagine that the admin is going to have a very similar surface area to what you see within the Teams client to be able to do moves, adds, and changes of things like not just group call pickup and delegation, but also, who am I forwarding my call to, or I'm forwarding directly to voicemail, or I'm going to ring my number and then forward to voicemail at a different timer. All that stuff will be enabled for an admin to be able to prosecute. First singletons, first just onesie twosies, then yes, bulk as well. So the idea being, I want to select a giant cohort of users and then, maybe change all of their timers to voicemail by some value. So that way they're all consistent. Those types of operations we absolutely want to do, but first is going to be the onesie twosies based out of the user detail page. That one we've just had that, like, SEFA's been a thing. I don't know. I mean, SEFA util has been a thing that we've had in the resource kit back in the server days that never actually made it into the product. We definitely want to have that be a first party citizen. Similar to that, where we think about having large transactions coming later. This is an example of us fulfilling the promise of having large transactions coming later. Today, you can create network elements, Wi-Fi, access points, subnets, etc. You can create all those in Teams Admin Center onesie twosie. And that, probably a particular form of hell if you have any size network that's interesting, right? To have to onesie twosie be able to enter those in. Clearly, you have the ability to script this up with PowerShell, but we need to be able to support an import mechanism. That's what this is. So you'll be able to throw a giant CSV at Teams Admin Center and then have us asynchronously in the back end chew through that and go and set up all those objects and set up all of those relationships. When that work is complete, the records show up in the activity log. So that way you can see, oh, cool, like all of these Wi-Fi access points were created. They were all associated with these right locations. In some cases, maybe we can't associate the location in the right way. We'll pop that out and we'll say, hey, this record didn't work. And then you can go and you can follow up on that. So this is in active development today. And we're actually pretty close. This is looking really good. This is a real screenshot. This isn't fake. So we have a little bit more work to tighten it up. When this is done, then we'll also be doing the work for the other side of the network elements as well, to be able to do uploads for that, have them processed asynchronously, and then get set up in the system. Associating network sites with a bandwidth policy. So the network site, the idea there is that it defines where a user is located. And so what you can do is you'll be able to assign a bandwidth policy to that site. So that way when a user roams onto that site, now no longer is their capability going to be driven from the meetings policy. Their capability is going to be driven from this kind of override, essentially. And say, hey, if you happen to be, this week working off the oil platform off the coast of Nigeria, you have a SOTA Strava WAN link, great. Now you're going to be picking up a policy that says no IP video and maybe a very reduced bandwidth, because we know that you're in that network site and we can respond to that appropriately. From the today only desktop client support, I don't know if that's going to expand into some other clients as well, or if that's just kind of the intent of the features to be exclusively desktop client. This is one of those things that we've got all the experience, it's kind of built out, and we're waiting for it to be available kind of end to end and for all the piece parts to line up, and then you'll see that show up in Teams Admin Center. Frequently, we do this thing where, well, not frequently anymore. We used to do this thing where we would get some set of experiences, we'd release them, and then we'd go, oh, shoot, well, maybe that doesn't work end to end. And so someone will try it, and it doesn't work, and then they go, oh, the website's broken, oh, what's going on? Oh, actually, no, the client hasn't picked up that work yet. So we do try to be judicious and make sure that only when an experience is kind of available to everybody, then we light it up in Teams Admin Center, so that way you know, hey, if I'm going to go and tickle these controls, it's actually going to change something. On that topic of having reciprocal facility across capabilities, right? I want to be able to do the same thing in PowerShell as in Teams Admin Center. We've had voicemail policy and settings in PowerShell for years, right? Like a very long time. We got to get that done in Teams Admin Center. So that's one that is an existing policy that's been out there for a while, that we're going to get exposed and we're going to get plumbed into the product. Call hold is new, so now we can have custom per user music on hold, which is super fun. So you'll be able to upload a file into the service, and then for any users that are assigned to that policy, that's going to be their music on hold that they're going to play. Call park policy. For like 2 years, we've had that policy page with parameters that are teasing you, that are like, oh, sometime in the future, maybe you'll be able to change the range. Sometime in the future, maybe you'll be able to change the timeout value. That's actually happening. The service supports this stuff all up and down now. And so you'll be able to do stuff like, hey, if you want to have one office have one range of call park and another office have another range of call park, you'll be able to assign policies appropriate to users in both those areas. It's good stuff. And then in the encryption policy, as well as another one that we're just finishing up with. So all of these very much in progress at different time frames. Most of these may be actually landing, if not this quarter, probably early Q1, because this quarter with holidays and stuff, we don't get quite as many dev hours. Boy, bunch of work on the voice apps that we have planned. One of them is that the call queue configuration's giant page. Takes forever to kind of go all the way through it. We want to be able to split that up to where there's some kind of logical sections that folks go through, not dissimilar to the way that auto attendants work through kind of a wizard process. It's a little bit less daunting for somebody to be able to set up a call queue for stepping them through the process. This is not actual product. This is potato quality PM level, like PowerPoint art. So clearly it's not going to look all goofy with weird spacing and green. But like that's the intent, right? Is that we're going to be having the call queue page be a little bit more consumable, a little bit easier for folks to be able to go through. So that's kind of a selection of stuff that like our folks are working on immediately, right? And this is the part that I'm most kind of excited to get through. Is things that are coming down the line. There is more to this list, and actually things that folks are actively working on that I don't have the opportunity to talk about because Ignite's coming up in a couple weeks. So know that there's a bunch of really fun, good, seriously valuable, kind of all up changes that are happening to Teams Admin Center. Capabilities that exist across the site, not just around the voice area, that we're going to be seeing. So definitely remember to check out the Ignite announcements. But this is like my big caveat, right? We're still figuring out the scope of a lot of this work. We don't quite know like 100% of which direction we're going to go in a lot of these areas. Timing, none of this stuff is soon, right? Likely we're starting this work up in the next calendar year. And the reason I'm here is that it's this feedback. This feedback is so important. And so, take a lot of the specificities, not necessarily as I can't trust Microsoft at all. Who knows if this stuff is going to show up. Know that we're doing this work, but you have an opportunity to help drive it and shape it. And so, again, thank you for the opportunity to kind of go through some of these ideas and some of these concepts and some of the stuff with you. I think it's I don't know. I get excited about some of this stuff. Anyone who's done a lot of deep work in the voice application space, the voice apps, knows that there's a lot of impedance in going and getting your voice app up and running. So there's some kind of very basic things that we need to do. First, around just making sure the resource accounts kind of operate appropriately. Resource accounts, for those of you who don't know, they're technically disabled user accounts. They're just a user account, Azure Active Directory that's been disabled, and then it has a particular string associated with it that then we tag off of and that then we can perform operations against. But it's not a user, right? Like the fact that it's a user account, that's just an efficiency on our part or lazy coding. However you want to characterize this, fine. But it literally doesn't represent a human. It just represents an object onto which we are layering state machines and controls and policy and other stuff to be able to make voice applications operate. So that way, when you make an outbound phone call from the auto attendant, the core call routing system knows how to prosecute that because it's a resource account that's the user ID that's actually delivering that phone call, right? So anyway, there's a lot that we have to do to be able to make that clean and to be able to make that much easier. Search doesn't work today for resource accounts. A bunch of the verbs for resource accounts don't function as expected. You're forced to, you can create resource accounts in Teams Admin Center. You can't delete them. So there's weird asymmetries there. We're just fixing all of that. Part of the fix that happens is that we're actively migrating not just this area, but the whole site onto a more performance set of APIs. And so a lot of that work we've actually started. We've started it as well for resource accounts, and we're in the process of figuring that out. But then we also need to figure out how to do licensing. Licensing is kind of weird because the license is free. You can use a virtual user license associated to a resource account, and you're all good to go. But only certain admins have the rights to be able to assign licenses. And even though it's perfectly appropriate for Team Service Admin to be able to manage the full life cycle of this, it's not set up in the stack end to end right now. So there's some work that we need to do there. We need to make sure that the relationship between resource accounts and the applications that they serve is really logical and is shown everywhere. That today isn't the case. You kind of have a pile of resource accounts in one section of the product, and then you have a pile of apps in another section of the product. And in some areas, you see the relationship, but it's not something that I, as an admin, really have the ability to count on. That I really can sink my teeth into. And then I'd really like to see the app, the kind of the core essence of the application be able to exist outside of the tenancy. And I feel like there's a bunch of great use cases for this. If I was responsible for the voice apps for a given business, I would probably be interested in making sure that if I got hit by a bus, somebody would be able to pick up on that work. Or if the tenant got hit by a bus, that for some reason something terrible happened, or we had a bad actor in there and everything disappeared, what's the backup I have of those apps? I also think about the partner experience. if I'm an integrator and I've got a really good kind of set of work around how to set up auto attendance and how to set up call queues, and I've spent a bunch of time in there, and I know that for lots of customers, this configuration of apps works really well. Boy, I'd want to abstract that and then be able to apply that to lots of customers. Be able to set up auto attendance and call queues really quick. That's how I think about some of the utility of the ability to import and export those app definitions. I like the backup concept of it. I like being able to use it for portability and flexibility for partners and integrators as well. So there's a lot of fun work here. In addition to, I got to be super clear, a bunch of fun work that's happening in the team that runs the voice app service, right? I'm representing the folks that look after the administration experience there. There's a bunch of stuff we do side by side. There's also a bunch of fun stuff that's happening in just like the raw capabilities of auto attendance and call queues that is also happening that's out of scope for our conversation. There is a fundamental set of capabilities in Teams Admin Center now that's around notifications. So that means that I can have alerts and notifications showing up to a team. I can have it show up as a chat. I can kind of manage how those show up. What's driving those notifications though right now is only stuff that deals with devices. So we have a bunch of work to ensure that not just devices, but all of the stuff that's happening within Teams Admin Center can pipe into this notifications pipeline, right? God, the most obvious one is all the SBC telemetry for direct routing, right? Like we've got this cool dashboard and I can see if my certs are going out of spec or if I've lost SIP options or some other kind of goofy things happening between the service and the session border controllers that I operate. Cool if I happen to be staring at the page at the time that it goes sideways, right? But what we'd love to have is some proactive notification of that. I'd love to hear what your ideas of proactive notifications could be in addition to that. I think about usage reporting, think about different thresholds there. But I can also think about scenarios where we're dealing with unused configs, or we're dealing with like, oh, you've set up a bunch of network locations and no users have ever traversed on those network locations. Those are a little bit more sophisticated. Those start to turn into like having some algorithms that kind of look through the usage of different objects instead of just like, hey, the SBC options are failing, so let's send out a notification. But there's a huge range here. Regardless, this is an area that we're going to be paying a bunch of attention to in the next year. I've already talked about this one. I've already let the cat out of the bag of the star there, but you know, the functional asymmetry doesn't just relate to the website Teams Admin Center and APIs and PowerShell. Like I really think of those as, you know, the three legs of the stool, right? Oh, my clock just reset. Is that intended? It's not. I still have 15 minutes, right? Okay. Fundamentally, we really believe in that, right? Like I definitely feel bad when someone's like, oh, the only way I can do this is in the website, or the only way I can do this is in PowerShell. That's absolutely not how we think about the requirements. It's not how we think about the product. And I think that it really, like I said, it disserves admins that are coming at this fresh. It disserves admins that have a preference for using the website. And we want to be able to support all that. In addition, we also need to be able to support partners coming in and doing these transactions. We would normally say you're coming in and doing these with admin on behalf of, or AOBO. You'll hear now the terminology is granular delegation of admin permissions, or GDAP. The idea behind GDAP is basically that you can use credentials of yours that you as a partner or you as a consultant, your own credentials are used to go and do admin activities in your customer's environment, in your customer's tenancy, with the appropriate constraints for Active Directory admin role, right? So like you could have global admin rights in some customers. You may have team service admin rights in other customers. Other customers maybe just have global reader, right? Depending upon the work that you're doing for your partner, you would have the right level of credentials to be able to support that work. This doesn't work across a lot of functions in the website. So this is an area where like literally every single verb, every single transaction, every single set of sauce and facility that we have within the website needs to be able to be supported for partners. And I would even take that a step further and say, I am curious about how, as a partner, it may be important to manage multiple customers as a batch, right? I'm still gathering requirements on this front, but I can imagine cases where you could say, hey, for you dozen customers that have this level of contract with us, we're going to go in and we're going to do this particular operation. And instead of doing it serially, I'm going to hit customer 1, then customer 2, customer 3. I do one function that goes and hits all of those customers at once. I'm interested in some of those cases because I feel like we have a lot of opportunity to be able to make it, again, make it a little bit easier and lower the barrier to entry, not just for novices, but also for practitioners that you have to do lots and lots of this work across dozens of different customers. And if some of that is consistent, maybe we want to take the work to be able to lower that barrier to entry and make that easier. So again, today, everything can be done with PowerShell. Many of those experiences are built out in Teams Admin Center, not all of them. And then the API piece is super interesting. So I talked a little bit about the partner piece there, thinking about multi-tenant operations. Similarly, we think about all the cases in Teams Admin Center where I can only do a singleton transaction and forcing ourselves to think about, actually that needs to be a batch transaction that deals with multiple users. So today I can do stuff like, I'm going to select a whole bunch of users, I'm going to assign a policy to them all. That's pretty straightforward. But being able to do it, that same kind of thing for dial-in conferencing settings, or looking to do that same thing for, different types of telephony config, or I want to go and select a bunch of my SBCs and do like one config change to all of my SBCs at once. Those are the sorts of things that we'd like to see within bulk operations. And then know that there's a bunch of stuff that today you do in PowerShell that just isn't available in Teams Admin Center. I think about the inbound and outbound number manipulation for direct routing. Think about unassigned number treatment. I think about the SBA configuration. All that stuff we need to build out experiences for. And then finally, we talk about the three legs of the stool of the website, PowerShell, and Graph. Today, the architecture that we're going to says that Teams Admin Center and PowerShell are both hitting the same config API layer. But today, that config API layer isn't available publicly. And in the past, I've talked about this is definitely our intent. We definitely want to see config API get out the door, have that be available publicly. It makes total sense. It hasn't happened yet. And so I definitely want to advocate for that internally again. I want to make sure that we're not just kind of losing the thread on this. The config API facility is incredibly powerful. It's all the stuff we do in Teams Admin Center. Probably in 6 months, it's going to all be working off of this API. But what I'd love to be able to hear are specific scenarios, either from ISVs or from SIs, with respect to why would it be useful to be able to have another programmatic way to be able to get at policy and configuration and different config scenarios in addition to PowerShell. Personally, I think having a code against PowerShell would be brutal. like to actually, wrap a product around it, because that's what we have in a lot of areas of Teams Admin Center, is a website wrapped around PowerShell. But I definitely want to hear what some of those specific scenarios are, because I think that we have an opportunity to advocate for Config API going public and making that just a general service that, hey, if I want to go and programmatically create 1,000 policies, I can do that. Super straightforward with an API. It's done. But I don't have a lot of those details. So I'm curious to hear what folks have with respect to that. Data representation. This starts to get into a little bit of the more wonky stuff with Teams Admin Center, and this is one of the reasons why I was talking about all the different back-end systems that we talk to. They all have different capabilities, and so as a result, I can't have the same capabilities across the website, because each of these services kind of does something different. Some of the services will be able to support certain type of search operations, other services don't. But I think of search, sort, filter, I think of those as absolute table stakes. And it's kind of a joke because we're talking about data tables, but anyway. We got to be able to have really useful views that summarize all this data, especially if I've got 10, 20, 30,000, whatever, users, teams, phone numbers, dial plans. I want to be able to have some way to sum up that information in a real rational fashion for end users and be able to allow them to customize that. Different folks are going to have different requirements here, and we want to be able to support them. And then not everything should be a darn table. Like it drives me nuts that we have all this kind of cool emergency address capability, and we're not throwing those addresses onto a map, right? Like there's a lot of ways for us to be able to represent this data in a way that's different from kind of a straight data table. You may notice that like this particular screenshot's fairly old, because you look at the left nav, that left nav hasn't been like that for a while. And so we've had these designs, we've had these thoughts, and I look at this and I think, God, this is a great start, but boy, we could also overlay that map view. I've got like, the size of the circle, is related to the number of users in that site. That's a great start. But I could throw a texture on top of that, or I could throw a color on top of that, and I could show a different lens of data, right? Maybe that should be the total number of calls that have gone out in the busy hour. Maybe that should be how their call queues are doing. So like, there's a lot of opportunity for us to surface the data that we have going on within the product in a rational way for folks, instead of kind of more of a straightforward data table. Administrative units. This gets super wonky, but essentially think about splitting the work for an admin, not across the scenario, all right? Not across like you get to work on meetings and you get to work on teams and channels, but instead thinking about it on another basis. Like think about it on the user community. You get to do the management of engineers and you get to do the management of the salespeople. Or by location. Location's the most common one we hear from folks. Hey, I've got the admin in Germany, I've got the admin in Brazil. Why does the admin in Brazil have the rights to source German phone numbers? That doesn't make sense, right? There's so many scenarios here. Being able to decentralize teams and channels management, right? So instead of a global admin managing this stuff, maybe you can decentralize this down into like the person that works in the office and the teams and channels that are appropriate for that office. You can have the local IT folks manage that. Talk about the phone number management kind of scenarios. We definitely see these in auto attendants and call queues. Really big customers, giant customers, single tenant. I want to make sure that my IT organization's structure and function is mirrored within the management facility of the tenant, right? If I have an IT organization that says like, hey, these folks are responsible for these 3 countries, then their work should be scoped in the same fashion. That's what administrative units does. This is coming from Azure, actually. So the Azure Active Directory has administrative units rolled out. You can now see it starting to show up in different parts of the product. We're slowly integrating that into Teams Admin Center, but a lot of the big funky work that's going to happen here is around phone numbers and voice apps and all those types of configuration objects. And I'd love to be able to hear some of these examples. I know this is a big topic, especially amongst big customers, because they're like, this is ridiculous. This is a big risk that I can have all of these people playing on my auto attendant, or I can have all these people playing on, voice configuration or voice apps. Kind of along the same lines, thinking about how to up-level our configuration capabilities. I don't know if anyone's remembers Route Helper from way back in the day. Route Helper was a super useful product that allowed one to create a bunch of test plans and create a bunch of kind of configurations, and then be able to test those configurations and be able to run their config against a bunch of test plans to determine whether or not everything across the kind of end-to-end PSTN connectivity thing works as intended. And there's a bunch of steps there, right? I've got normalization rules in my dial plan. That gets fed into the voice routing. That gets fed into my routing policies. Those policies end up pointing to routes. Those routes are served by SBCs. There's a bunch of steps along that chain. It's fantastic. It allows for a lot of power and a lot of sophistication, but it's super complicated. And I need to have a way to, today I'm looking at just these individual objects, and I want to back way out from that and be able to test this stuff end to end. So we're going to build out a set of interfaces that allow folks to do that. And fundamentally, it's around this, instead of, thinking about how this particular dial plan or how this particular voice routing policy works, I can step away and I can look at the whole thing. And then I can, make onesie-twosie changes. And I can say let's look and see what happens if I take this user and a different dial plan, egressing through a different SBC, what happens when I make that call? And can I actually do that? Can I actually fire up a test call and see that novel configuration work? And then if it does, maybe I go and I commit that novel configuration. So there's just a ton here. And I actually look at this set of work, this taking a scenario and backing out to where I can view the whole scenario across a bunch of different configuration steps. That's fundamentally one of the areas where we need to get to broadly in the product. Most of our experiences in Teams Admin Center, they follow this really consistent pattern. I'm going to create a thing. I'm going to create some configuration of it, create a new SBC, configure the SBC, and then I'm going to have the SBC show up in my different policies and my different routes, right? Now, that works if I've got several pages of documentation where I'm flipping through and I'm following the steps. Step 1, create the SBC. Okay, that starts with opening up Teams Admin Center. I open up Teams Admin Center. Okay, the next step is, I'm going to do the next step. Right? That to me, we can do a lot better. So I want to be able to think about cases where we're abstracting away from that, here's a series of objects and here's a series of configurations, and allow someone to get stepped through that experience and not necessarily have to rely on the documentation. So I think of a few different cases here. I think about your initial acquisition and assignment steps, including locations. So the first time you get into a tenant and you're like, all right, I'm going to get some numbers. And then you go, oh, wait, well, okay. First I got to create my location, and then I've got to, and if you don't have docs there with you, sometimes that can be really confusing and off-putting. Certainly with direct routing, if you've done it a few times, yeah, you can click through this. It's the first time you're wiring up an SBC, you don't know the relationships with all those objects, and necessarily you shouldn't. It's okay. We should be able to walk you through those cases. But the idea is that we're up-leveling and we're stepping away to where folks that don't have a lot of deep experience, folks that don't have a lot of deep facility with the product can still get a lot of value out of it. So I'm literally right at time, I think. My clock's an hour off. All right, cool. So I'm just going to leave this here. And so we're not going to have time for questions, so I want to make sure everyone gets the chance to refill their coffee and use the restroom and stuff. But know that there's a bunch on our mind, right? And for all the things that I've talked about here, I know that each of you has an idea in the back of your head where you're like, oh, wait, but there's another thing that I want to make sure you get done. And that's why me and all my colleagues from Microsoft, that's why fundamentally we're here. So we're really excited to touch base. We're really excited to share what our ideas are for the future of the product and then be able to get your ideas as well. So that way we can integrate those into our dev plans. And it's been a while, but I've got a team and they're ready to go. We're gonna build stuff. And the next year, we're gonna build a lot of good stuff. And it's gonna make the voice and meetings and voice apps and all those experiences within Teams, it's gonna make them a lot easier for partners, for little customers, big customers alike. That's what we're looking to do. And so I love your help in every possible opportunity for that. So thanks for taking the first step and sitting through this. I appreciate it. Thank you.